not to be confused with Minoan, the language written in Linear A millennium earlier than Eteocretan. Eteocretan, ɛtεόκριτεν, t. lit. True Cretan, from Greek tau epsilon omicron sigma, meaning true, plus Cretan, is the non-Greek language of a few alphabetic inscriptions of ancient Crete. In eastern Crete about half a dozen inscriptions have been found which, though written in Greek alphabets, are clearly not Greek. These inscriptions date from the late 7th or early 6th century down to the 3rd century BC. The language, which is not understood, is probably a survival of a language spoken on Crete before the arrival of Greeks and may not be derived from the Minoan language preserved in the Linear A inscriptions of a millennium earlier. Since that language remains untranslated, it is not certain that Eteocretan and Minoan are related. Ancient testimony suggests that the language is that of the Eteocretans, i.e., true Cretans. Quote, the term Eteocretan is sometimes applied to the Minoan language, written more than a millennium earlier in so-called Cretan hieroglyphics, almost certainly a syllabary, and in the Linear A script. ɛtεός, a leading authority on Eteocretan, has stated that it is essential to rigorously separate the study of Eteocretan from that of the hieroglyphic and Linear A inscriptions. Ancient Greek sources: kappa rho eta tau iota sigma gamma alpha sigma tau iota mu epsilon sigma nu omicron pi omicron nu tau. Kappa alpha pi iota epsilon iota rho alpha. Pi epsilon rho iota rho epsilon tau omicron sigma nu delta nu theta rho omega pi omicron iota. Pi omicron lambda omicron iota. Pi epsilon iota rho epsilon sigma iota omicron iota. Kappa alpha nu eta kappa omicron nu tau alpha pi omicron lambda eta epsilon sigma. Lambda eta delta lambda omega nu gamma lambda sigma alpha mu epsilon mu iota gamma mu epsilon nu eta nu mu nu chi alpha iota omicron iota. Nu delta tau epsilon omicron kappa rho eta tau epsilon sigma mu epsilon gamma alpha lambda eta tau omicron rho epsilon sigma. Nu delta kappa epsilon delta omega nu epsilon sigma. Delta omega rho iota epsilon sigma tau rho iota chi alpha iota kappa epsilon sigma delta omicron iota tau pi epsilon lambda alpha sigma gamma omicron iota. There is a land called Crete in the midst of the wine blue sea, a beautiful and fertile land, sea-girt. In it are many people, innumerable, and there are 90 cities. Language with language is mingled together. There are Achaeans. There are great-hearted Eteocretans. There are Kydones, and Dorians in the three clans, and noble Pelasgians. Homer, Odyssey 19, lines 172 to 177. Tau omicron epsilon tau omega nu phi eta sigma tau alpha phi epsilon lambda omicron sigma tau mu nu pi rho sigma omega delta omicron rho iota epsilon sigma kappa alpha tau epsilon chi epsilon iota nu tau delta epsilon sigma mu iota kappa omicron nu kappa epsilon delta omega nu alpha sigma. Tau delta nu omicron tau iota omicron nu tau epsilon omicron kappa rho eta tau alpha sigma nu epsilon nu alpha iota pi omicron lambda iota chi nu iota omicron nu pi rho sigma omicron nu pi omicron epsilon tau omicron delta iota kappa tau alpha iota omicron epsilon delta iota sigma epsilon rho omicron nu tau omicron sigma mu nu omicron nu tau epsilon omicron kappa rho eta tau alpha sigma kappa epsilon delta omega nu alpha sigma alpha tau omicron chi theta omicron nu alpha sigma pi alpha rho chi alpha iota epsilon kappa omicron sigma tau omicron sigma delta lambda omicron iota pi omicron sigma pi eta lambda upsilon delta alpha sigma. Of them, the peoples in the above passage. Staphylos says that the Dorians occupy the region towards the east, the Kydones the western part, the Eteocretans the southern, whose town is Pressos, where the temple of Dictaean Zeus is, and that the Eteocretans and Kydones are probably indigenous, but the others incomers. Strabo 10. 475. Indeed, more than half the known texts are from Pressos. Strabo's Pyro Sigma Omicron Sigma. The others were found at Dreros. Inscriptions. There are 5 inscriptions which can be attributed Eteocretan, 2 of them being bilingual Eteocretan and Greek. There are 3 other fragments that may be Eteocretan. The whole Eteocretan corpus, and more, is very fully discussed by Yves Duhaut in Le Ეთεόκρατος, Les Textes, La Langue, Dreros. The 2 bilingual inscriptions, together with 6 other Greek inscriptions, were found in the western part of the large Hellenistic cistern next to the east wall of the Delphinian Temple of Apollo Delphinios, in Dreros, at a depth between 3 and 4 meters. The texts are all written in the archaic Cretan alphabet and date from the late 7th or early 6th century BC. They give official religious and political decisions and probably came from the east wall of the Delphinian. They were published by Henri van Effenter in 1937 and 1946 and were kept in the museum at Neapolis. The longer of these 2 inscriptions was found in the autumn of 1936 but not published until 1946. The Greek part of the text is very worn and could not easily be read. Almost certainly with modern technology the Greek part would yield more, but the inscription was lost during the occupation of the island in World War II. Despite searches over 70 years, it has not been found. The other Dreros inscription was also published by Van Effenter in 1946. The Eteocretan part of the text has disappeared. Only the word s, tau upsilon pi rho mu eta rho iota alpha, tup myriaia, remaining. Pressos, or Pressos. The other 3 certain Eteocretan inscriptions were published by Margherita Garducci in the 3rd volume of Inscriptions Cretaceae, tituli Cretae Orientalis, in 1942. The inscriptions are archived in the Archaeological Museum at Heraklion. Raymond A. Brown, who examined these inscriptions in the summer of 1976, has published them online with slightly different transcriptions than those given by Garducci. The earliest of these inscriptions is, like the Dreros one, written in the archaic Cretan alphabet and likewise dates from the late 7th or early 6th century BC. The second of the Pressos inscriptions is written in the standard Ionic alphabet, except for lambda, which is still written in the archaic Cretan style. It probably dates from the 4th century BC. The third inscription, dating probably from the 3rd century BC, is written in the standard Ionic alphabet with the addition of digamma war. Other possible fragmentary inscriptions. Garducci included 3 other fragmentary inscriptions. 2 of these fragments were also discussed by Yves Duhaut. The latter also discussed several other fragmentary inscriptions which might be Eteocretan. All these inscriptions, however, are so very fragmentary that it really is not possible to state with any certainty that they may not be Greek. A modern forgery is found in older publications included with Eteocretan inscriptions. It is variously known as the Psychro inscription or the Epiroi inscription. The inscription has 5 words, which bear no obvious resemblance to the language of the Dreros and Pressos inscriptions, apparently written in the Ionic alphabet of the 3rd century BC, with the addition of 3 symbols which resemble the linear A script of more than a millennium earlier. The enigmatic inscription has attracted the attention of many, but has now been shown by Dr. C.H. Kritzes to be a modern forgery. Description: the inscriptions are too few to give much information about the language. Lexicon: the early inscriptions written in the archaic Cretan alphabet mark word division. The same goes for the two longer inscriptions from the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. From the Drerose inscriptions are the following words: Ai jaraba komn menin ias luria lmo tupmiriaya. Komn and lmo seem to show that n and l could be syllabic. As to the meanings of the words, nothing can be said with any certainty. Van Effenter suggested, in I equals Dorian Cretan alpha delta epsilon equals classical Greek delta epsilon. Third singular aorist of nu delta alpha nu omega equals it pleased the council, the people. Quote, i.e., it was decided that the word alpha delta epsilon occurs in the Greek part of the bilingual text, and all but one of the other Greek texts from the Delphinian in Drerose. Tupmiriaya equals kappa alpha theta alpha rho nu gamma epsilon nu omicron iota tau omicron in the Greek part of the inscription, i.e., may it become pure. Also, Van Effentry noted that the word tau epsilon rho omicron nu cheese seems to occur twice in the Greek part of the first Drerose bilingual, and suggested the text concerned the offering of goat cheese to Leto, the mother goddess of the Delphinian triad, and that the words Ijaraba and Isaluria were related words with the meaning of goat cheese. The only clearly complete word on the earliest Prizos inscription is buzz, and there is no indication of its meaning. The other two Prizos inscriptions do not show word breaks. It has, however, been noted that in the second line of the 4th century inscription is Phryzoiani, Phi rho alpha iota sigma omicron iota iota nu alpha iota, and it has been suggested that it means it pleased the Praesians. Alpha delta epsilon pi rho alpha iota sigma iota omicron iota sigma. Classification: though meager, the inscriptions show a language that bears no obvious kinship to Indo-European or Semitic languages. The language appear to be unrelated to Etruscan or any other known ancient language of the Aegean or Asia Minor. Brown, after listing a number of words of pre-Greek origin from Crete, suggests a relation between Eteocretan, Lemnian, Pelasgian, Minoan, and Tyrrhenian, coining the name Aegeoasianic for the proposed language family. In whichever case, unless further inscriptions, especially bilingual ones, are found, the Eteocretan language must remain unclassified. Single quote. While Eteocretan possibly descended from the Minoan language of Linear A, inscriptions of a millennium earlier, until there is an accepted decipherment of Linear A, that language must also remain unclassified, and the question of a relationship between the two remains speculative, especially as there seem to have been other non-Greek languages spoken in Crete. See also combinatorial method, linguistics, Cretan hieroglyphs, Linear A, Aegean languages, Eptio-Cypriot language, Philistine language, Eteocretan text corpus.